Good morning, everyone. A very brief welcome to today's online event on mastering asset management, navigating new responsibilities. We'll be starting promptly at noon. And while we wait for everyone to join, please do take some time to check out our housekeeping rules, which are displayed on the slide on screen. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please use the chat to let us know so that we can try and get this resolved. I'll be back at noon in about 4 or 5 minutes when we will get things going. Thanks very much. So, hi all. A very warm welcome to you. My name is Chris Borg, Policy Manager at NELC. It's my pleasure to be chairing today's event on mastering asset management, navigating new responsibilities. Firstly, I'd like to quickly run through a few housekeeping announcements, some of which are shown on the slide that you can see on the screen. Do use the Q&A function throughout the event to put questions to our speakers, to whom huge thanks for attending today. and the chat function to interact with your fellow delegates and to share any information or links on this topic. If you require any technical support, as mentioned, please do post this in the chat, and my colleagues will try their best to help. The closed caption features, subtitles that is, can be accessed by all attendees at any time during today's event. Bear with me for a minute while I just read a few slightly technical bullets out for you. So for desktop and laptop users, to turn on closed captions, please select Show Captions. The button will be labeled CC. If the button isn't visible, please select the three dots on the bottom right corner of the screen. Then please select Captions, and after that you'll be prompted to click Show Captions, so please select this option. If you're using a mobile device or tablet, please scroll across the menu on the bottom of your screen and select Captions. You'll then need to click Show Captions. And then once those captions are on, you can access a live transcription of the event. If you have selected the closed caption feature, please use the reactions feature, the next button on the right of the closed captions feature, by ticking the yes button, which is the green emoji with a tick, to show us that the closed captions are working at your end. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, as I said, please contact NELT support via the chat. That's my colleague Courtney. You can see in the panelist window with me, and we'll endeavour to rectify the issue. So after the event today, we'll send out the presentation slides used. All three speakers have got some fantastic slide decks to share with you, the chat and any other useful information. And we'll also be inviting your feedback on today's event. So please do look out for the feedback form, which should pop up on your screens in Zoom following the conclusion of the webinar. And all delegates will be muted on entry to the Zoom webinar platform, in case you're wondering why that's happened. So just moving on, Courtney, to the sponsors slide. NALT would like to thank its partners Clear, CCLA and Blaschere Illuminations for their extensive support for today's NALC online event. And then moving on to the event itself, so session title and speakers. So local, that is parish and town councils, are increasingly tasked, as we know, with managing a broad array of critical assets, often while facing pressure from financially constrained principal authorities to take on additional community facilities. The best example of that in a very timely way is actually, as I was saying to the speakers, Shrewsbury Town Council, that's having to increase its precept by over £2 million just to keep much needed services going because the principal authority can't. That's a bit of an aside. This event today will provide an in-depth exploration of the essential principles for managing current and future assets. We'll address the challenges of overseeing new facilities, which may come from business rates and minimal financial support, or advance notice, very little advance notice very often from principal authorities. Today, you'll learn comprehensive asset management strategies to oversee exciting assets and effectively integrate new responsibilities. And you'll also discover practical approaches for navigating financial constraints, including handling facilities and business rates and other financial implications despite limited funding. And you'll gain valuable strategic insights to optimise your asset management practices and stay ahead of evolving challenges, in brackets, LGR, close brackets, with actionable advice. So, enough from me. I'm thrilled today to be joined by a brilliant panel of speakers, as said. That's Alison Berwick, who's head of North and Central at Locality, Dr. Amy Burnett, Research Fellow at the Centre for Enterprise Environment and Development Research, and Alan York, Deputy Clerk to Thetford Town Council over in Norfolk. Now, without further ado, I'll hand over to Alison. Over to you, Alison.
Thank you, Chris, and hello, everybody. As Chris said, I'm Alison Berwick. I'm Head of Services for Central and North, and I have a counterpart down in South for Locality. Next slide, please. For those of you that might not know much about Locality, Locality is a national network membership, and we support communities to become strong and successful. So very much mirroring what yourselves are trying to do to make the best and to create, transform lives and create fairer societies in your local communities. We've got about 2,000 members across England, and they're all party to our network, our peer learning, our specialist advice to help every community that they have thrive. As well as our direct advice and support, we have tools and resources and a very active policy department, incredibly important for ensuring that we're all working in a better operating environment. Some of you might be familiar with us from our involvement with neighbourhood planning with MHCLG recently. Next slide, please. So historically, we have been involved in assets and very much community assets and community asset transfers for a long time. I'm not about to give you a kind of background onto the history of it, but this is really to say that we bring years of support and expertise and programme delivery to the sector. So we very much understand assets and their management of them and the things that need to be considered here and what's coming up in the future, obviously. So some of you might have been aware or even received funding or been involved in the recent Community Ownership Fund, where we were the lead delivery partner role on that. And we're also heavily involved in other things like We're Right Here campaign and obviously campaigning for the community right to buy. Next slide, please. What's really important to take into account is that there are a lot of myths around assets and community asset transfers, and they really are just myths. Communities lack the skills or the interest. Assets are captured by one group. It's too politically sensitive. It means freehold only. It's financial management for groups. It's financially risky for councils, and it's all just about saving old buildings. Well, there's a flip side to every single one of those comments. And I'm not going to go through every single one of the list there, but to say it's important to say that there's a strong story for each side of this. And if you're putting together and managing assets in the right way, all of these can be overcome. I'm not saying they don't come without their challenges, but they're certainly not myths. They're things and challenges and opportunities that we can get over. Next slide, please. So we like to consider assets a little bit like a stool with three legs, with the asset and the viability and its long-term sustainability. And we really need all of those to be in place to make an asset work strongly, a firm footing on the ground. Next slide, please. First to consider, well, buildings and land can be liabilities, not just assets. So we suggest that you keep an open mind right from the beginning. Think of it from all sides of the story and all sides of the opportunities. For example, is it in the right place, especially for what the use might be? Thinking of the building or the land, what's its current condition? Are the layouts, do they potentially need any changes? Are there any planning uses already in place that you can't actually change for your potential use? Equally, are there any covenants and restrictions? Is this going to impact access in any way? What about any heritage? And I think I should add there, environmental considerations as well. And will all of these work for the planned services or activities that you're thinking about? So we really need to think about practicalities of this. Next slide, please. It leads us very much onto the condition of the asset, that you'll need to take an overview and a review of exactly where it is. Is it actually usable at the moment? Do you need to have repairs undertaken for it? And what might be the timescale for this? And is it just repairs and a lick and paint and maybe a new boiler? Or is it extensive repairs? Now, these are all going to cost. And so we need to consider how you're going to be able to raise the funding for that. The real challenges, as we know at the moment, for town and parish councils. So you need to think very hard and clear about that. Where would you go to for funding? Will you be able to have the capacity to deliver that? And will you have the support to make sure that you're putting forward a strong case for that? Have you got professional support and advice to deliver the project? And where might you be able to get that from? We've put risk down here. Obviously, the other element that we want to think of is having a risk register throughout it. We'd move on then to offer an initial options appraisal to think more about the viability and the bigger business plans that you're going to have. How are you going to use the asset? What's going to happen within it? How often? Is it going to be weekly, monthly timetables? How are you going to timetable what's happening in the day and the evenings? And how is that going to help with the running costs of it? There's the physical building costs that you're going to have, the utilities, phone repairs, maintenance, cleaning that's going to come into it. But there's also the staffing costs. Can you afford staffing? Do you need to have this run by volunteers? Are you going to be running activities within it? And if so, how much are these going to cost? What are the other overheads that you've got to consider? The insurance, any systems, booking systems, any governance, and areas like that. And have you taken on any loan repayments for this? Have they been factored into it? Key to all of this is your income and expenditure. How are you going to cover the cost to generate the income? How are you going to make the asset work hard enough to make this work? And does your income exceed your expenditure? How can we flip that and make sure that it's covering costs? It's really important that you don't tweak the finances. And we very much recommend that at this stage, you make sure that it stands as the stool again with its three strong feet with unspecified grants. They're an add-on. Make sure that it actually stacks up without the grants. Or do you need to consider changing the business model of it? There's a lot to consider here. Next slide, please. Which leads on to the sustainability longer term. We've talked about capacity just at the beginning there, but do you have the right people on board to actually be able to manage the assets? Have they got the time and the skills? Can you get in the training for them? There's a lot that can be addressed here. Can you recruit staff and volunteers? And how are you going to do that? And how are you going to retain them? Equally important, and especially when you're working directly with your communities, do you have the support from your community? And are you engaged and part of the project? They're linked to all sections of the community, not just a part of it. And does that support and relationship extend to maybe statutory organisations and other funders? And how does this all fit in with wider plans for your area? As importantly, at some point, we need to make sure that we constantly understand what are the missions, objectives and values, and how your project's making a difference, that you could demonstrate the impact that your asset's making on your local community. Next slide, please. Alongside on that, we have the management of the day-to-day. Have you got a risk assessment? Is all your health and safety in place? Your policies, your health and safety, your fire, first aid? Have you considered anything about the Legionnaire's disease and the water and the lifts and the catering? There's a lot to consider here. And it's not just about the day-to-day, it's about the planned and costed management and maintenance going forward. Is that all being thought through? Next slide, please. One of the very useful assets that I wanted to draw to your attention that came out of the Community Ownership Fund was the My Community website. We brought together all of the 12 leading community support organisations that were involved in it and combined the knowledge for a very resourceful online tool, which has webinars, ideas, templates for a whole range of things that you might wish for part of your projects. So it's very worth having to look at, and it's all free, and it is to make your community an even better place to live. So a really good place to starting point if you're looking for something like a outline business plan or a diversity and inclusion policy. Next slide, please. And at Locality ourselves, we're always trying to respond to what the community needs. So we've recently, at the beginning of this year, updated our own community ownership advice and support section on the website, which has free resources for you to look at, which I think will be of value for you. And we've just released a new Community Powers Neighbourhoods about how community anchor organisations transform places. There's a lot of resources on our websites that I think will help you with these managing your assets. And a benefit as well, a whole community asset transfer from start to finish webinar that you might find useful if this is something that's on your radar. So finally, last slide, please. So finally, just as you navigate the challenges of local government review, consider what your new assets might be or how you might manage the assets you have. I just wanted to reassure you that there are a lot of support and advice there for the practical short-term and long-term for that. And we'll be very happy to help with you, local insight, but national expertise from all our membership. Many thanks.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much indeed, Alison, for such a thorough expose of Locality and your own expertise on asset management. It's always often and long been my view that Locality are probably in the public sector the expert body on asset management really in the country, and that just demonstrates why. And I know that lots of parish and town councils that did and do have neighbourhood plans you mentioned, heavily relied on those budgets and those grants, and were sorely aggrieved when the government cut them. But equally, thank locality for the brilliant job they do and have done in giving those grants out. But brilliant, and yeah, that's really set the scene nicely for our next speaker, who is Dr. Amy Burnett from Middlesex University, who's also going to, I think, touch a little bit on how this fits into the wider devolution agenda. So over to you, Amy. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, that was really helpful. Great to kind of hear how locality have got loads of resources on the practicalities of kind of identifying and managing assets. And now I want to spend the next 10 minutes giving you a bit of a whistle-stop tour in terms of some of the work that I've been doing looking at value, particularly from the perspective of the voluntary community social enterprise sector, but more generally because obviously how parish and town councils work within community is also, there's lots of opportunities to partner with the VCSE sector. And I want, if you go to the next slide, please. I wanted to kind of start with just asking the question, can assets help reframe what we value in society? Because I think there's real opportunity to kind of think about the value of why we want to kind of take on new assets and what the contribution we can make through how it's managed, how we can provide uplift in it, how we can develop new partnerships, and what new things and how can we be innovative as well as like ensuring that the community can access the services that they need. So if you go to the next slide, please. So I have been doing a few things which kind of inform my view on this particular topic. So I've been working particularly with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport and their Civil Society and Youth Directorate over the past 15 months. The fellowship has come to an end, but I was looking at value and what that means in terms of the voluntary community and social enterprise sector, which led me to develop a typology or a categorisation of how different types of value could be used to strengthen what we measure in terms of, are we identifying what is truly valuable, going beyond like, the cost benefit analysis that might be typically applied when thinking about is something worth doing. I've also contributed to research on devolution in town and parish councils, and also the idea around, maybe there could be a regenerative devolution agenda, which is what I want to kind of present now. As well as lots of experience working with neighbourhood plans and community and parish councils more generally. If you go to the next slide. So I want to kind of just look very briefly at the responsibilities that devolution is asking of parish and town councils and what that means in terms of rethinking how we consider assets in the context of this change in responsibility. So if you go to the next slide. So I'll whiz through these a little bit because I think that you kind of know the context, but essentially there is this increasing shift in responsibility from principal authorities towards the kind of lower tiers, but how do we kind of see this transfer of assets as something that might be a shift because somebody's trying to shed a burden that they can't afford to manage, to thinking about like how do we reconsider this in terms of the way that we resource the things that matter to us and also kind of generate more community value. So if you go to the next slide. So we have the right to buy, there's these extended powers. Social value is also supported in the commissioning and kind of the public service commissioning and procurement, so that's a positive thing. More deprived communities have been identified to kind of access community wealth funds, although that's obviously not for every community, and we've just discussed like the implications of the withdrawal of the neighbourhood planning funding, which was delivered through locality, and we all know very well about the kind of the neighbourhood level governance, what that might mean in terms of being in conflict or in harmony with the town and parish councils as they are at the moment. If you go to the next slide. So when we think about traditional asset management, we might be thinking about compliance, maintenance cost, risk, financial metrics, and how much is it going to cost, etc., etc. But there's also in the work that I've been doing on value, that is the idea of a shadow value. So what's the thing that's not being measured? So oh, sorry, something's popped up. Yeah, so in terms of like, how can we think differently about going beyond the kind of more traditional understanding of asset management? If you go to the next slide. So maybe asset transfer is an opportunity to redefine what we measure and why. So, thinking about this multiple capital value typology, which sounds very complicated, but I'm going to show you what that looks like in a minute, and hopefully it will sound and look less complicated. Centering community voice in how we manage assets and bring the VCSE sector, or bring the voluntary sector into it, which is something that Alison just touched on. Thinking about how we can weave in the value of an asset into a wider kind of, I don't know how many people have heard about community wealth building, but it's this idea around generating positive economic and social links to support and strengthen a local community through things like procurement, and asset management can come within that as well. So essentially what we can kind of look at now is how there are different frameworks out there that could help to kind of identify what is the social and cultural infrastructure in a place, and then moving beyond that to think about how we can rethink what is important to us and valuable, and how that can then be used to kind of leverage the amplified value of what we do when we manage assets in a particular way. So if you go to the next slide. So one thing I'm exploring in my research is the idea of asset-based ecological citizenship. So that's kind of thinking about how by supporting action on kind of being more environmentally aware, being more socially aware, and integrating assets in that, how that you can then use that as a framework to think about asset management. So that's looking at not only the financial, but the social, the environmental, the cultural, democratic, and the kind of human impacts of what we value and what we manage. If you go to the next slide. Right, so I'm going to share with you now the British Academy framework for measuring social and cultural infrastructure, and this was developed with the Bennett Institute in Cambridge. So if you go to the next slide. So essentially, this was work that was done last year, and it's a fantastic framework, and the link will hopefully be shared in the chat, and it will also come with the post reading as well. But it's kind of asked a series of questions like, is it an asset? Does it function as infrastructure? And is it social and cultural in character? So I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip to the next slide, which has got a diagram which will hopefully be easier to understand. So, an asset is defined as something that is long lived. So it's kind of had that past and future value, which Alison mentioned. Is it functional infrastructure? So, is it something that enables something else to happen? So, for instance, like a town hall or a village hall will enable things to happen. And then also, does it support building of relationships, identity exploration, meaning making, or creative expression? So that might be, green infrastructure in a park, or it might be a local theatre, etc. So there is a kind of process through which to identify social and cultural infrastructure. If you go to the next slide. And then there are some key considerations, like who is measuring what is valuable. So that's really important because it can invite in more people to kind of think about the value of an asset, and also what's their agenda in doing so. So there are these series of questions which the Bennett Institute and the British Academy have identified to kind of help ensure that the asset is identified properly and that its value is measured, and also the implementation and the kind of maintenance of it is also considered as well. So you kind of like then think about identifying the infrastructure, which is the slide before, then measuring how it's used, and then who's being represented, and then how's that informing decision making. So again, it relates to some of the things that Alison just referred to. If you go to the next slide. So the key things is when But if you were able to kind of identify what is valuable for you, when why you're taking on an asset, how community voice will be included, who's going to be represented, then these are really kind of key important things to consider. And the thing about who is measuring and why, measuring provision and social measuring provision and the representation analysis were just in the slide before, but the measuring and social cultural infrastructure framework gives more information around looking at the different types of data sources that you can use, also making sure that you get community voice into kind of how important it is for the community, because that can help with measurement, and also how the asset over time is kind of amplifying what's already in the community. If you go to the next slide. So I'm going to skip over that for now because I think in the interest of time, if you go to the next slide. So this is some work that I've been doing, which is all about value. So I was tasked with looking at value in the voluntary community and social enterprise sector when I was at DCMS in the Civil Society and Youth team. And although this is looking particularly at the VCSE sector, I think that this typology is actually quite helpful for a whole range of different stakeholders, whether you're a parish and town council, maybe working with the voluntary community and social enterprise sector, or central government, or a business. It's kind of quite helpful to kind of think, what do we mean by value? And this is just kind of version 1. There's much more that could be added or amended and tweaked. But as a starter, what I was trying to do was look at what are the different types of value, how might you summarize that, and what are the measures of success when you look at something from a particular value perspective. If you go to the next slide. So one thing that I'm working with now, so the reason why I'm sharing with you the British Academy's work on measuring social and cultural infrastructure is because as a follow-on project to my fellowship with DCMS, I am working with the British Academy who fund some really great research, and I'm looking at working with their Digital Societies programme and their Measuring Social and Cultural Infrastructure team to integrate the work that I have done with the value typology to think about how can this be actually applied in practice for a range of different stakeholders. So that might be with the parish and town council sector, it might be with the voluntary community and social enterprise sector, etc. And look at what are the actual data requirements that are needed to actually build something that is useful, that can really integrate value into how people measure what they do, essentially. And one of the things that's really important is to try and identify something that I referred to earlier, which was about shadow value, the things that aren't being measured and the things that often get overlooked. So one of the things I feel is often overlooked is that recognition and appreciation, either of work, for instance, taking parish and town councillors as an example. I've heard quite a few times about the feeling of not being recognised or appreciated or valued, and I think it's really essential that the contribution that you make and the contribution that anybody who effectively volunteers and contributes is appreciated and is recognised, and there are mechanisms to ensure that. So I think when we're thinking about assets, we can also think about ourselves as assets and what we're contributing to society. So these are the kind of things that I want to address by looking at the question of value rather than impact in how we kind of look at things. If you go to the next slide. I think, how long have I got? I feel I've run out of my 10 minutes.
Probably final 2 minutes, Amy.
Okay, so I'm not going to go too much into this slide, but what I want to show is that there are different ways that you can measure different capitals: environmental, social, economic, cultural and human, which is one of the layers in the value typology, and they can often be used in certain ways, but there is potential for these to be enhanced even more by looking at the feedback loops and looking at the way that they support positive change in a community. And I can share with you more detail because I haven't really got time to delve into it, but I'm just saying that there are opportunities to kind of make better connections with the data and the indicators that we use to measure things, so that we can contribute to kind of evaluating how we think about value in society. Next slide. Okay, next slide. So again, I'm not going to read out all of these. You're going to get them in the slide deck. But there are things that, there are immediate actions, there's some strategic actions, and there's also some capacity building that could be done to kind of strengthen, looking at things from a kind of value perspective, or utilising the measuring and social cultural infrastructure, or the value typology. Can we go to the next slide? So what I want to do is ask about whether or not people would like to be involved in exploring some of this in more detail. So I'm going to be running a series of focus groups which are going to be looking at how, is there a need for a value mapper, and if so, how could it support the work of, for instance, parish and town council? So if you want to be involved in that, then please let me know, because there'll be a focus group that will be held within the next few weeks. So it'd be really good if you could email me. My details will be at the end. Next slide. Yeah, so we're going to do questions later, but if you go to the next slide, there are some questions here which you may want to kind of think about, which is, what are the assets that you're trying to look at the moment, and kind of like what is or isn't being, what frameworks might you use to support that, and what would adequate resourcing actually look like? So, is the current support that you're getting sufficient, and things like that. So if you go to the next slide so people can have my details. So yeah, so my email address is there, and there's also some more work. There's some more slides from the British Academy on the framework when these get shared with you. So thank you very much.
Huge thanks, Amy. That's fantastic. And yes, I think, as people will have noted, that there is an awful lot going on. That's because there's an awful lot of work to do in this area, and I think we should thank Amy. I think for linking what she's doing there to, I think, Alison's excellent sort of links and work and resources that locality have got. Because quite frankly, from where I'm sat, all sides of parish and town council are going to need all the help and all the information they can get if they're in local government reorganisation areas in 2026 and 2027. So I think we should all welcome all the information that's shared today, and all the information that will be shared in the post-event mailing. Yes, there's a lot of it. There is a finite amount of time today, but obviously all the slides that speakers have produced today will be included in the post-event mailing. And for those of you that want to read the full report that Amy alluded to, I believe that might be the British Academy one, then that also will be hyperlinked to the post-event mailing, so you can read that at your leisure. But do have a look at Amy's email address, and if that's the same thing you and I were liaising on, Amy, about the VCSE typology workshop, then that's a very good idea to encourage people during today's event to send you their email address in the chat. Okay, I've waxed too long. It's time for Alan from Thetford to give us his insights into how Thetford Town Council manages its assets, and it's ahead of the curve, really has been for a long time. And Alan's going to show us and tell us how Thetford manages its assets in such a fantastic way. Over to you, Alan.
Thank you very much. To put my presentation into context, Thetford is based in Norfolk. We have a precept income of about 1.3 million, a total income base of 1.6 million, and we employ 23 staff members, some on a part-time basis. The next slide, please. If you look at our starting position, our nemesis is buildings from an asset management perspective. Our buildings cause us huge consternation. We spend a huge amount of time in it. And so what I've done is I focused on that as part of this presentation. Hopefully town councils and parish councils in attendance will be able to share from that. Just looking at our portfolio of properties, we have 6 commercial properties. We have a medieval church, which is in a poor state of repair. We're desperately seeking funding to get that back in line. We own a complex which comprises our Guildhall and theatre building, which I'm currently seated in. This is where our administrative offices are. We own a residential property, and we have a charity that owns a heritage building with public gardens. We are on a daily basis, we are constantly reminded of the kind of complexity of managing heritage buildings, the compliance pressures, and the insurance risks that are associated with that. If I could just ask for the next slide. The hidden pattern of asset failure, we've tried to summarize. This is not a scientific exercise we've done, but if you look at a time frame, in years 1 to 6, you have minor repairs deferred, you don't have a significant issue. In years 7 to 10, structural issues start emerging, and from year 10 plus, you really are in deep trouble. And what we found at Thetford Town Council is the majority of our buildings are sitting in the year 10 plus situation. I'm responsible for finances, and I can assure you that on a daily basis, I'm virtually moved to tears because I have to find money to address ad hoc emergency maintenance rather than looking at preventative maintenance over a period of time. What we believe at Thetford is that the cause of this is poor governance rather than inherent building flaws. So what we've done, and the focus of our presentation, is to really look at governance as a way of addressing our asset management, particularly in respect of our buildings. Next slide. Why are buildings high-risk assets? Well, first of all, when you've got heritage buildings like we have, they're compliance heavy. You've got to jump through a whole lot of hoops in terms of complying with all the various legislations. They're financially inflexible. You can't just sell them off. You can't demolish them because there's a whole lot of restrictions to them. And they're very sensitive to underinvestment. And just to highlight that, we have a charity that owns a heritage building. Every few years, we have to get that building valued. And just to illustrate the impact that it had this year, we had it valued. It's gone from £900,000 on its balance sheet to £500,000. So that's a significant jaw-dropping impairment that obviously it reflects the poor governance around our charity that has been in place for a number of years. Next slide. Restructuring and local government devolutions has still got to happen in Norfolk, so we're really uncertain as to what the implications are going to be. We know that we're going to get increased assets. Car parks have already been mentioned. We've got significant pieces of open space land. But we're also inheriting 2 buildings that house museums, so that creates a kind of higher risk for us. And the challenge that we have is the capacity mismatch from an officer's perspective. We don't believe that we have the skills or the capacity to manage those assets. So as more and more assets get transferred to us, we have a structural mismatch. And it's trying to manage that between the risk that we're inheriting and the capacity that we have. Next slide, please. We also have a capacity and governance mismatch. If you look at the capacity of councils to manage, look at assets on a longer term, building assets have a long period of stewardship. Town councils typically come in for short periods of time. I mean, we're a very political council, so the aspirations of the councillors in terms of looking at the long-term sustainability of buildings, we have to take into account that they're not there possibly not there for a very long period of time. They could be gone. So they're not interested in that because they see their terms in the electoral cycles rather than in looking at assets in the longer term. Next slide, please. We as a town council, we've been grappling with this for a number of years. We realize that we've got 2 choices. One is we continue using a fragmented management approach where we just do the same things over. But bearing in mind, if you keep doing the same things, you end up with the same result. And we don't believe that that's really going to help us from an asset management perspective. The second choice that we have is to redesign our governance around risk. So to say, what can we do differently? How can we actually build the capacity and the governance capacity to ensure that we manage those assets so that it's not just part of the mismatch in terms of management capacity or council capacity. So we have decided to redesign our governance risk, and this, what we've done, if I can ask for the next slide, is create a new entity, a charitable entity called the Thetford Heritage Trust. This is in the process of being established at the moment, but what we're looking for it to do is to steward our civic, cultural, and museum assets into one body. It'll be a distinct legal entity with charitable objectives focused exclusively on our heritage building asset stewardship. The process of doing it, we see this as it's going to start off with just one building that we're going to transfer into it, but over time we're going to drip feed in a number of other buildings. We're going to create a board structure that can focus on that. That's not going to be, subject to the terms of councillors, but it's going to have heritage, finance, and governance speciality. We're going to have to put in a new management team to manage that board to ensure that there's institutional memory and longevity. And fourthly, we believe that this heritage trust will have better access to financing than it will than our local government organisation, our town council, trying to apply for funds. We don't believe that that's necessarily going to open up that avenue for us. Next slide, please. What does a charitable trust help us with? And I'm ready to summarising what I've said previously. We were hoping to put in place an expert board that will have the relevant skills to focus on our buildings. We hope that it'll be able to access charitable funding. We can't resolve the backlog in our building maintenance just through trying to recover through a precept. There's no ways that that's going to happen. So by creating the structure, we hope that we can go out and get grants and form partnerships with other organisations. We've got organisational continuity, so the organisation will continue, step outside of the council terms of office, and lastly, there'll be professional recognition in terms of working in various networks. Next slide, please. We're very conscious that just changing form doesn't resolve problems. I'm an accountant by profession, and typically you go to an organisation, they've got some accounting problems, internal control problems, and they say, well, let's just change all the accounting systems and those problems will go away. And they typically don't. We're very conscious that a charitable trust is just not a magic solution. But what it does do is it creates a mechanism that we can hopefully start challenging or start addressing the financial challenges that we face. So we will be able to, our maintenance backlogs are not going to disappear. They're still going to be there. If we don't get the income model right, we're still going to have persistent deficits. If we don't structure ourselves in terms of being competitive, in terms of mobilising grants, we're still going to remain the same. And when you start a new body, you've got increased compliance because you've got to look at the operating a charity. It's not just easy. You've got to comply with the rules and regulations of the Charity Commission. So we believe that a charitable trust will improve governance and funding access, but it's not going to resolve the financial challenges. But hopefully by putting in place a board that has the skills, we'll be able to do that. Next slide, please. We looked at three options in terms of the governance. We looked at a charitable incorporated organisation, a CIO. These are new bodies. They haven't been around for that long. So we steered away from that because we were very worried that the funders and lenders and partners would be quite suspicious of a very new, untested model that doesn't have the track record. We looked at a charitable trust as the other option, and that in itself has a whole lot of inherent challenges. The charity cannot enter into employment contracts, it cannot enter into partnership contracts, and certainly cannot enter into any commercial contracts. They're designed to manage an endowment. We've selected a company limited by guarantee, and there's a whole lot of reasons for that. Basically, it addresses the shortcomings that I've identified in the other kind of corporate forms: legal clarity, funder recognition, operational flexibility, and hopefully a balanced board. Next slide, please. So just to conclude, we're very conscious that by doing this model, we're creating two particular focus areas. Our council will still have to render basic services. It will have to, it can do all the things that town councils typically do: manage open spaces, public toilets, car parks, markets, etc. And there'll be an entity focused on that will be able to do those particular functions. The second entity will be this trust, which will focus on a lot more of promoting the arts and culture aspects of what we have and what we believe that we can deliver, so that in the longer term, that becomes financially sustainable or has a better chance of becoming financially sustainable. I've rushed through this presentation. I did time it as 10 minutes, and I think I have taken up my 10 minutes. So thank you very much for listening. I look forward to answering any questions people have. Thank you.
Fantastic, Alan. And yes, you do finish exactly at 1:45, which is hugely helpful because that's exactly when we're due to start Q&A. So that's fantastic. Thank you to all speakers who've given us some really detailed, fantastic aspects on asset management from different angles, which I think is all relevant. You've heard the practical, you've heard the resource aspect, and you've heard the academic stroke. I think slightly theoretical and sort of model-based approach, which is as asset management becomes much more relevant, key, especially I think as we start this new phase of LGR. So yeah, look, let me kickstart these questions. What we're going to be doing for this is asking you to post your questions, please, into the Q&A function in Zoom webinar. You can see that box in the middle of the bottom of your screen. Please do continue to put your questions in there. I think 4 or 5 have been posted in. I've been reading them for the last few minutes, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. The way I'm going to do this is just as I do all of these online events that I chair, is to just make sure that we're asking questions to the speakers that are fairly short, fairly clear, and where we're not making statements. There has to be a question mark at the end of what you've written, and it's not kind of logistical. So if that's okay, what I might do is a departure from what I've done before, which is to actually ask, because some of them are fairly different angles the question are coming from. I might, instead of asking everyone to comment on that, I might just ask what the specific speaker that they relate to answer. So I think one question I'm going to put to yourself, Alison, first, if that's okay, is a question from Richard Griffiths, which is, and this could be applied to the wider public sector or the parish and town council sector, I guess. But Richard asks, what percentage, as a rule, should you allow for professional fees on a capital project of, say, £1 million, which isn't untypical, I guess, Alan, in some senses for the parish and town council sector for larger councils. But yeah, Alison, do you have any, perhaps with neighbourhood planning in mind, do you have any steer for Richard there?
Yeah, no, I mean, very much depends on what needs to be done, doesn't it? What kind of surveys, whether it's ecology or building surveys or anything. But I mean, as a broad brush, I would say something along, 15 to 20%.
Yeah. No, that's good to know. That's good to know, because obviously people need to allow enough to pay professionals and technical experts, but not, as Alan was hinting at before, not find out that they're unable to derive that advice because they haven't budgeted for it in the first place. Brilliant. Okay. Moving on. Any of the other speakers have any steer on that? I mean, before we move on to the question, I don't want to just rush through these questions. And I do encourage delegates to post their questions. Now is your chance. If you know that your council is going to be going through LGR, local government reorganisation, this year, and you think there's a reasonable chance you might have liabilities or assets gifted, I use that term advisedly, to your council, ask away, because now's your chance. Alan, any experience you've got on professional fees and how much to allow for them, say within a £1 million envelope?
Well, I think the one thing that we have learned is if you don't have professionals helping you in your projects, it can be even more costly. We had a clock tower at our guild hall, which we started to manage in terms of the previous management structure that was in place at Thetford. And it was total disaster. We were paying huge amounts for scaffolding. The job required significant specialist work. So I think you got to look at professional fees are expensive, but can you actually project manage a significant project? But we have a basic rule: if we have a project greater than 25,000, we have to find a reason not to employ project managers rather than to employ them, because our day to day is just we don't worry, we don't battle to find work to do. but we certainly do battle to find the time to manage some of these projects. So that's the golden rule that we use.
I think that's
Fantastic.
a
Thanks
really
very
good. Sorry, I was going to say that's a really good point, Alan, is that, when you get to that kind of level, that is a major project, and you may want to have somebody completely externally managing that for you and being responsible back to the councils to feed that in. And I think the other point is that you need to review what kind of specialist advice and professional services you need at each point. When you're getting to your key milestones, you're re-reviewing and having a look to see what is there. If this is a project that's going to have external funding, remember, things like that can be included in the costs. They're perfectly legitimate, as are things like contingency and inflation.
Fantastic. That's really relevant, both. Yeah. And Amy, anything you've picked up from your research, or any input you want to have to this question? Some of these quite appear to be quite technical questions based on council experience or projects they're currently managing. But yeah, any input you want to make on that?
Yeah, that's not necessarily my kind of area of expertise, but I was really fascinated to hear your experiences, Alan, and and that you went for a limited company in the end, and you talked very eloquently around the governance aspects of it. So just to kind of say thanks to Alan, really, but I haven't got anything specific to add on that question.
No problem at all. Thanks. Okay. Looking down the questions, so I think some of these are aimed at specific, as I said, aimed at specific speakers. Others aren't, and I'll just have to kind of offer it up. But there's a really good question that Imogen Makepeace asked, and it's a double-barrel question, but we'll ask the first part of it. So it says, within the powers and duties of a town council and reflecting that NELC and local government best practice, can a council establish an arms? Well, you've half answered the question already, Alan, and I guess you haven't directly answered it. Can a council establish an arm's length or subsidiary body to manage and develop its community asset portfolio? It's a really good question. In order to maximise public benefit, financial sustainability, and community engagement. Is that basically why you set up the arm's length body that you did, Alan, in Thetford, to derive those three benefits?
I think if you go back to, I mentioned right at the beginning that we have a charity, and what we were doing is we were running that as a, it was an endowment charity. We were running that as a kind of add-on to the council. It wasn't receiving enough attention. So what we did is in 2023, we decided to change it completely. We brought in an independent board. We employed a specialist, charity specialist who has come in and helped us. So it's a matter of, if you've got these entities, you have to manage them correctly, And when we looked at that, we saw the positive results that we achieved from doing that. It was logical that we would do the same for our Thetford Heritage Trust. The legality of it, we can have these things. A lot of local councils have charities all over, for various reasons. But what we've tried to do is get one. The Charities Commission, is our understanding from the expertise that we've consulted, is that the Charities Commission doesn't go along and just create a charity for the sake of it anymore, because they're very conscious that the charity just doesn't just do it. If you use it as an instrument to do more of the same, it's not really going to work. So what we've done is we have got expertise. We believe that it is within our powers, and we've got charity specialists who've helped us setting it up. And we believe that that's the right way to go. It's not, in our opinion, it's not prohibited.
Brilliant. No, that's fantastic. And clearly there will be different models. But before I bring Alison, Alison, your hands up.
I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, obviously, Alan's what they chose obviously was what met what they needed. But there is the option at the beginning to look at what governance models are the right governance models for what you need to do. I noticed there was like another question about community benefit societies and things like that. Well, obviously, a lot of community benefit societies are set up because there can be investment through community shares, withdrawable investment. So there is a process that people can be helped through, and I'm not quite sure if it's on My Community or on locality's website, but it talks about the different types of governance models that you could have and operating models and what kind of impact that has. So it is an important thing to consider right at the beginning, which is the best one. We always say purpose fits model, basically. So you have to have the right model for what you want to do. So it is really important to consider your options.
And also the point that's just come up here in the rooms, in the Q&A and in the chat a bit, is the fact that especially for larger, what we call larger councils, Alison, in this kind of sector, which is, the town councils primarily, but some of them, with populations of over 10,000, and you even have these super councils, don't we, Alan, in the sector, which, thinking of Shrewsbury, Chippenham and Salisbury, for example, just massive multi-million-pound budgets. As a result, direct result, often replacing district councils in the past, which have been abolished. There's going to be a lot more of that this year and next year. And they're going to have literally multi-million-pound, really pushing the envelope budgets. So creating models which actually, they don't have to keep changing and they can keep adding quote unquote assets. The famous example is Lowestoft Town Council, isn't it, Alan? You may have heard of that from down your way, East Anglia, which was created about 5 or 10 years ago. And on day one, it was quote unquote gifted a massive long list of liabilities, which I think it's taken years to pay off. I could be wrong, but the council, I think, had to precept for its first couple of years to just keep the things running. Would you call them assets? I'm not really sure you would. I'm not really sure they would have done. I think they've really turned things around and have done a fantastic job. In fact, one of the clerk came to an online event back in September to talk, I think, talk about running assets and stuff. But it's for these big new town councils, they're going to want to create models which, whether they're charitable trusts or something from the list you've given, Alison, which they don't have to keep changing to, and they can just keep on adding to, as you said, Alan. Link. There is a bridge to what the work you're doing, Amy, which is modelling, and you're looking at kind of different partnerships and different that could be created, and the models for which between perhaps parish and town councils and VCSE organisations. Does this come into any of your research, or could it? The different types of kind of entity which, whether it's like Thetford's or some of the ones Alison's mentioned, are used or created to facilitate better asset management in a joined up way across the public sector. Is that kind of paradigm relevant in any way at all?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, to the work you're doing or going to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, governance is one of the kind of categories, if you like, on the that value typology that I talked about. And governance is something that I'm very, very interested in. And at CEDA, which is a part of Middlesex University, we're very much interested in business models. And obviously, business models can also be kind of organisational models. And, you might have more entrepreneurial angles to kind of different types of business model, whether it's community focused or public sector. So absolutely. So that's, some of the stuff that we've discussed today is really, really interesting from that kind of governance model, particularly when, certain business models don't fit for purpose, and kind of looking at that in more detail. So yeah.
But yeah, and I'm mentioning because Alan has mentioned partnership working. So in other words, creating an entity which would enable Thetford Town Council, for example, to partner with other entities to secure grants in that kind of thing. Some of which I assume, Alison, would, and you've mentioned you've worked with some parishes before across the country, which is great, but would be VCSE partners. They would be, kind of development trusts or whatever it was, heritage trust, whatever it might be, but that weren't parish and town councils, to deliver said projects or manage said asset. I don't know if that's so. All of this can be joined up, can't it? I'm guessing, Alan, in the sense that for financial sustainability, partnering is going to be a must in some cases.
Well, I think we've got quite a heritage riches. I mean, we used to be the ancient capital of East Anglia at one stage. There's a lot of heritage there, and the risk that we have at the moment, and what we've seen, it's very fragmented. We went to the National Heritage Lottery Fund to get some funding, and we try to bring in all these different organisations that exist. There's from the steam museums to DASOM. There's a whole lot of variety, and we just found that we weren't able to kind of coordinate that through a funding bit. They've said no, they'll only fund us. But we believe that we've got to bring it all together. It's pointless having a bits and pieces. And I think it also comes down to capacity. We're a small town. We've got 25,000 people. there's so many different boards at the moment. I know someone asked on the chat, one of the questions that came up is, how do you find trustees, etc. Well, we've got, the Dad's Army Museum has got its own board. The Charles Burrell Museum's got its own board. The Ancient House Museum's got its own board. The GW Stanningforth charity has its own board. We have another Charles Burrell Centre, it has its own board. And so what we've done is we've actually there's just no capacity left. So our kind of long-term vision is to say, well, you've got all these different trustees, bring them all under one umbrella so that you can actually then get the best of all worlds, and you've got a better chance of being successful and accessing the skills that exist.
Yeah, that sounds like a real model for potential. Amy, you can say.
Yeah, no, I just think the one I've just put in the chat, Publica, I don't know if you've come across it. It's not something that I've kind of done any interviews with anyone, but I know that model is meant to be bringing together different entities to actually work in partnership to kind of leverage resource to maximize coordination, capacity, etc. So I'm not sure whether that is as a model of success, but it certainly looks like it could be. The other thing is this issue of kind of, it's not only the business model needs to kind of fit the purpose, but the funding needs to fit, the actual practicalities of working and the partners and the resources behind who's applying for the funding. And so it's like the funding has to be fit for purpose as well. So if you've got any insight or anything you want to share on that, then I'm kind of looking at funding systems as well. So it'd be really helpful to kind of share insights on that, so I can feed it back.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, no, linked to this, there is the aspect of income, and Angela Howells has posted this question. It's an age-old question, which is that everyone knows in the parish and town council sector that districts and boroughs and counties love to keep the income from car parks, with the exception of one or two, I think, town councils, maybe in Cornwall, in the tourist areas. Padstow, I think, is one famous example, where they do run a car park and derive the income for it. Don't know of many others. The districts and everyone else keeps them, and basically parish and town councils don't get a look in. Well, I think that might be changing because said boroughs and districts are all going to go. Basically, a lot of them are going to go, aren't they? So I don't think they're going to have the ability to retain them. But then the question, I suppose, is whether or not these are working entities or going concerns, these car parks. Who's going to then run them in perished areas? Well, guess what? So Angela's question is, as a town council, I don't know which council Angela's from, but we would like to have control of the possible increases in charges, but we're aware that maintenance may be high, and we're not a very big council. It's just to point out here that some town councils are actually what we would call smaller, so because they don't have huge precepts. But Angela asks, is there anything we can do about this? So I don't know, Alison, I'll aim that one at you first. It's an income generating asset point, isn't it? And you probably know the rest from your own experience that principal authorities tend to want to hold on until they've completely sunk to the bottom of the sea, the income generating assets that parishes also want.
It's interesting that you say that, because I live in the East Midlands and my local town council does own its car parks. It's Southall Town Council. So they do get the income from it, but it raises other issues with, increasing what the costs are with the local residents, and things like that. But yeah, I think it's, maintenance obviously does then fall with a town council, and that needs to be considered. It's all down to this planned maintenance and costed maintenance as well, and really understanding that and putting that into anything. I'm not, when the question says, is there anything we can do about this? That's more about the negotiation to actually be able to take over one. I mean, I think we should be challenging. We should be going back and asking. There's a few questions down here where people have said about different approaches to community asset transfers. Is there any consistency? No, not necessarily in our experience. So I think it is okay to ask questions and challenge sometimes what might be being told of you or presented to you. So I think it would be worth going back. If you want to take on assets, you have to have, you have to think about where the income's going to go. We talked about that at the beginning, the income, the expenditure. and the balance of it's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Amy, your hands up.
Yeah, I mean, a thought suddenly came to me, and I guess it's more for discussion rather than that I've got an answer to it. But if there is an expectation that these assets are going to be shared, and that there's an expectation for parish and town councils to step up, or other community actors to step up, if they can't, like, what is the risk of the commercialisation of what was formerly a kind of public asset? And I don't know if that conversation is happening, and what people in the room think of it. So, for instance, like we talked about car parks, and obviously, normally there is a kind of public oversight of them, but is there a risk that there's going to be a space that's created that will just open up commercial pressures, and it'll be hard to claw it back?
Yeah, I mean, before I bring Alan in, who would, I think, is the perfect person to answer your if rhetorical question, Amy, though valid, is I think that there's an expectation. Public toilets is probably the best example I can give, Alan, actually, in this case, where public convenience has now lobbied to get rid of the toilet tax, the business rates that was on, often at the last minute, literally dumped on kind of like parish councils, public conveniences 3 or 4 years ago. And we got that abolished. So, in other words, a perfect example of last minute. We can no longer afford to run these conveniences. What are we going to do? Often in coastal areas. David Cameron famously, when he was down Prime Minister, I think about 10 years ago, went down to on holiday to the public conveniences in this particular town he was at, and couldn't use them or something like that. And then it became a bit of an issue nationally, got some PR. And the related issue at the time was, well, that's true, David. Basically, town and parish councils are, Cornwall's fully parish, but are expected to keep these assets. So there's just a resident expectation that there will be business continuity. They almost don't care who runs them. They do care if there's like a particular price tag attached, clearly, and many of them are expecting them to just carry on running for free and aren't aware of the tax implications of them. But they were being just literally dumped on town and parish councils at the last minute, and with no negotiation. Here they are. As well as having to pay to run them, there was often a £10,000 tax bill. Well, we got the tax bill removed, but this whole LGR debate, Alan will be aware of it. And apropos the Lowestoft example I gave before, at the last minute, and it's often liabilities, like you said, Alison. They're called assets, but technically, financially, they're loss leading, and they're often they're going to cost these town councils and parish councils, money to run. The Shrewsbury example I gave at the top of the event, basically it has tax implications. So the council tax, the precept has to increase very often to pay for them. But as Alan said, there are limitations with that. So, Alan, anything to add in answer to the question that was just asked there from a Thetford perspective?
I think we've been in the situation where we've had a gun put to our head by our district council on a number of occasions. For example, play parks a number of years ago, they had 13. They told us we either take them over or they're closing them down. Public toilets, we have 2 sets of public toilets in our town centre. The same thing happened. Either take them over or we're closing them down. And on car parks, it's been a little bit more interesting because car parks, Breckland, we have 5 market towns, and they wanted to introduce car parking charges so that it wasn't a cash cow to them. And there was such an outrage regarding that. We, as a council, were very much against that because it's going to kill our town centre. But so what we've done is we've actually taken it on, but we've actually did a little bit of a consultation, and it's actually added 5% to our precept just to run the car parks, because I think there are 9 or 10 sets of car parks in the town centre. And for us, it's strategic because if charges, if we don't take them over, there's a risk that the new body, whoever it is in terms of ITR, will institute car parking charges, and our town centre, which is really battling at the moment, will battle even further. So for us, it was a strategic decision. Luckily, the residents so far haven't thrown, kind of lit the bonfires, for the 5% increase in council tax. But we have done some consultation about it. But that's the predicament that we actually ended up in.
Yeah, and you've done the right thing. And this came up at the online event that we do on communications, communicating difficult decisions that councils have to make back to residents, like big precepts increases, and involving them in a decision almost, defuses it, doesn't it? But you can only do that so far. And to answer your question, Amy, I don't know many examples. I know that principal authorities work probably more, don't they, Alan, with the private sector, and they have more private sector contracts. But then again, they deliver usually bigger strategic services. But I guess we may well see where it's simply not possible, either in unparished areas or in areas of parish councils where they're too small to run services. There are limits to what some size of council can take on. The private sector stepping in almost in a PFI sort of way, But you ask some very interesting questions there, Amy and Alan. You've answered, and Alison have kind of answered them. I think there's one final question I'm going to ask, which I think links to the kind of public-private aspects of this and the different modelling approaches that you mentioned, Alison, yourself, which is from Kay Sentence, who says that. We've found that looking at different governance formats also changes the conversations around economic models and community engagement. So this is your territory, Amy, that I imagine that can be challenging for traditional councils. I see you typing an answer to that. So I'm not entirely sure what's meant by traditional councils. Presumably what's meant there is councils that haven't or don't really want to take on many assets or haven't. There are some really big councils that I know of. Some of them aren't member councils of NALC, who literally just want to keep their precept as it is. They might deliver one service or manage one asset, but their priority is to keep the precept as low as possible. And guess what? It's been done on party political grounds, which perhaps isn't in the best interest of residents. I could be wrong. But yeah, I mean, so Amy, I'll aim that one at you. In answer to Kay's question, I haven't seen an answer if you've typed it, but any comments there?
No, I was just saying to Kay privately, just gave him my email address to follow up if we don't get to talk about it properly. But no, it's very interesting because obviously you have got this array of different business models or organisational forms, and Alan was talking about how some didn't fit, and particularly when new organisational forms are created, and there's a bit of a reticence to kind of get involved in them because you don't really know what they are, and so it's just quite interesting how governance, whether you're a cooperative or whether you're a private company or whether you're a community benefit society, how your articles of association actually kind of they shape who you engage with, and they shape how you do things, and I think it's I don't know whether it's almost like there needs to be an appraisal with, I don't know if this is on the cards, but of what is the value of each of these different organisational business models in terms of are they fit for purpose in terms of going forward as we look at devolution, and what is the kind of world that we want to see? Do we want to see a more kind of inclusive community wealth type approach than the way that I've kind of illuminated, or do we want to have a more commercial angle? And it's almost like how have we got too many of a certain type of business model, and are we asking the right questions, and what is the actual resource to set certain business models up? So I think there's an appraisal question, if you like, of whether they are kind of fit for purpose. So I don't know, I think we're about to run out of time, but it is really interesting in terms of how governance shapes discussions and decision making and partnerships, and I think Alan's got a lot to say on that as well.
Yeah, no, complete. I was just about to bring Alison to close the Q&A, bit Alan and Alison in a link to that, which is certainly in terms of community engagement, whether or not parish and town councils are big, medium, or small, or traditional, or go-getting and want to really zealous and want to take on assets, whatever. They should always be engaging with the committee anyway. It's not like an opt-in. It's something that every parish and town council, all 10,000 of them, should be doing. Certainly in NALC's view. Alan, anything to add?
I think it's just a matter of making sure that we act responsibly, and I think that to me is the biggest risk that we have. At the moment we've got councils that we've inherited backlog maintenance, and all we're doing is by shifting it, we just generational equity is very important to me. It's one of the principles that I have. And if we don't fix today's assets with today's money, all we do is we leave it for future generations to fix today's problems with their money. And there's a little bit of unfairness of it. So I think we've got to be far more strategic with our assets, and we've got to make sure that we maintain them going forward. Otherwise, we're just, kicking the can down the road. It's false budgeting. It really is what I call fool's budgeting. You fool yourself that you're actually got a balanced budget, but in reality you don't.
Yeah, someone's just posted something before I just invite Alan. That's great, Alan. Invite Alison to close. NALC is responding to this M8CLG estate management consultation in coming weeks, which is about basically, as you know, management companies just going in often into parished areas and trying to manage things like open spaces, playgrounds, that kind of thing, sidelining parish councils and charging really high fees and not doing a very good job at all of doing it. And the government clearly wants to do the opposite and sideline them, and is trying to, re-involve the public sector. So we are responding to that, but it does overlap because it's talking about, in a sense, asset management, isn't it? And that's an example, Amy, of what can happen when you involve the private sector in managing public assets, ostensibly public assets. The runes aren't good so far, and so someone's mentioned the word fleethold. That's directly relevant to that whole agenda. So doubtless we'll be making some of these points in our response. Alison, to close, any final parting shots?
Yeah, I think it's really important to kind of end on the community, and when you're talking about assets, to know what's important to them. What do they value in their communities? What do they want to help? What do they want to help and get involved in? Could there be different models that we could have taken forward? Let's challenge the way that things are done, and make sure that we aren't, as Alan says, passing on liabilities and mistakes and maintenance to the next generation, and inspire them more.
Absolutely, well said, and a pertinent note to end on. Thank you so much for that, and to Alison, Amy, and Alan for their valuable insights and contributions today. That's fantastic. Really, I think one of the best events we've done in terms of really drilling down to the issue at play today, at least in my view. To delegates, please do fill out the feedback form when it appears on your screen. It will literally pop up just as you are about to leave Zoom. And our post-event mailing to all attendees will include the chat and any presentations you saw today. There's a hell of a lot of information there, so hopefully that will inform you councils. Do pass the information on to your councils if you're here on their behalf, because there's going to be an awful lot of discussion around asset management and yes, liability transfer, involving many of your councils in the areas when districts and boroughs go. NALC, for its part, would like to say thanks again to partners for today's online event, so CCLA, BHAB, and Blash Year Eliminations.